Hi, it's Bob here. I'm going to make a quick little video about a concern that we have here in the land down under, Australia, about a treaty that our government has put in place. This treaty is called the AUKUS Treaty. AUKUS is an acronym for Australia, United Kingdom, United States. Okay. Now, I'll give you a bit of a background. Like, it has been considered over the years a good idea for us to have these treaties with United Kingdom and United States. We're sort of, like, if you look at the map of Australia, you think it's huge because it's like a continent. It's actually the smallest continent, but the smallest continent and the largest island. Okay, so we've got sort of water, or 365 degrees around, and it takes up a significant part of the planet Earth geographically. However, our population is only 26 million. Most of the Australian continent is desert, and most of the population is along the southeast coast, the interior of Australia is basically desert with very, very little human activity of any kind. It's too dry to have any sort of agricultural activity of any significance. So we're 26 million people down the bottom of Southeast Asia, with our neighbours, the nearest neighbour, Indonesia, I think that's 100 million people, and of course China with 1.4 billion people, and a growing economic might. And that has sort of shifted the centre of influence, like not just in our region but around the world. That we're sort of Aussies, most Aussies are sort of European descendants, and culturally we're sort of a European type country that's on the opposite side of the world to our ancestral origins. Okay, and so it's sort of been, if we sort of get invaded, these Europeans will come to our defence. So the treaties have been put in place with the United States, which is like a significant military power. They spend more on defence than the next 10 countries combined. Okay, so the theory has been, we got in alignment with these United States, and they've got all these aircraft carriers and F-118s. That'll be a deterrent. Okay, so anybody that thinks of invading Australia, they'll sort of have a look at our treaty with the United States and they'll say not a good idea and leave us alone. Now, the problem with that, there's a couple of problems with that. Firstly, that the centre of power has been with the United States. Okay, United States has been this huge economic monolith that sort of dominated the world stage economically, financially, and military. Okay, now their run is over. Okay, like. United States economy is basically a 21st century basket case. So $31 trillion in debt. That's a debt that can never be paid, and I think the reason why so many countries are still sort of trading in the US dollar and not calling in the debt because they know that the debt can't be paid, but they're sort of putting off the inevitable. It's going to be an economic meltdown that the planet Earth has never seen before. So let's kick it down the road, and maybe it'll happen on somebody else's watch. We can just defer it and defer it and defer it. Sort of putting your head in the sand, thinking that maybe it'll go away, but it's not going to go away. And apparently China these days is the largest economy And United States has sort of been foolish in the extreme. First of all, I've already mentioned the debt, and I was listening recently to a report that mentioned the debt on the derivative market. There's apparently a quadrillion dollars floating around on the, not sure what, I presume a quadrillion is a thousand trillion. Floating around on derivative markets, so that's where the bulk of investment in the United States has gone. Sort of playing this, Ponzi game scheme, and in the defence industry, and the defence is not a good economic strategy. Spending on defence doesn't put, goods and services into the market. It's very inflationary. You spend a lot of money, but you don't have a sort of return in wealth. The wealth is sort of in these, aircraft carriers and Hornet F-18s and all the rest of the stuff, which doesn't produce wealth. And the countries that sort of produce motor cars and build bridges and the infrastructure and goods and services that go in the supermarkets and things like that, they sort of got a balance. What they think called supply and demand. Okay, so you've got the money out there, which is the demand, because they can spend, and on the other end of the scale, you've got goods and services that go into the supermarket. So that sort of keeps inflation. But if you spend all this money on defence, you've got a lot of money being spent, but nothing in the supply side. And anyway, that's part of the reason why the United States is in trouble. And apart from the fact that they've shipped all their industry, well, not all of it, but most of the industry from the United States has gone to China, which has sort of left their manufacturing industry sort of depleted, and basically provided an economic stimulus to the growth of China. Okay, I've got a few notes here. Now, one of the things that's always staggered me, I'm not an economic expert, but I understand how money's created and things like that. Now, the United States, their Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank, which just defies all rational thinking when it comes to creation of money. Okay, well, you sort of think, well, okay, this is the productivity of your country. This is what we can produce, and we've got to sort of put a dollar value on that so people can sort of have a means of exchange. So
there's been a major incident. Heaps of fire is there. Flashing lights everywhere, and the road's all blocked off.
Okay, I'm doing this video clip while I've got a layover on my bus, and I forgot to turn the radio off. Okay, so
trying to work my way back to Port Road.
So the United States dollar, the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that have been just printed, sort of coming out of the Federal Reserve Bank, which is a private bank. Now, if you can make sense of that, well, best of luck to you, because it doesn't make any sense to me, right?
On Adam Street.
And that currency, traditionally, when countries print
on the
money,
other side of Port Road. It's all that intersection where we go to the depot.
So when countries sort of create a currency, they like to have a reserve. Okay, so if somebody says, well, look, I've got a few thousand of these, paper money, I want to know that it's got a value. Traditionally people say, well, okay, if you want to exchange that paper money, say you've got $10,000 in notes, and you can go to the reserve and you can exchange it for gold. Okay, it's basically the gold reserve. Now, traditionally, the United States had all this money in Fort Knox. Okay, but they haven't done an audit in Fort Knox, I think, for 60 years or something like that, and people just assume that the gold is no longer there. Don't know where it's gone. They don't think there's ever been a sort of anyone's been charged with theft or anything like that. I don't know how you'd knock off the gold in Fort Knox. There was a movie about that thing called Goldfinger or something like that, and it was just assumed it would be impossible to actually knock off the gold, but apparently the gold is no longer there. A wonderful situation, right? Now we've had the COVID scam. Now, for whatever reason, like we've been told that we've got to be vaccinated and locked down because this horrible virus is going to devastate world population. Now, what I want to address here is the fact that United States they're sort of on the watch for enemies, like they just war after war after war, like 20 years in Afghanistan and, like Syria and Iran, like Libya, just war after war after war. Now, those, military, warmongering countries, like they'll do everything they possibly can to sort of harm and disable the enemy troops. Okay, so you sort of keep your own troops on side, make sure they, get fed and do a little bit of raping and pillaging and things like that. And you do everything you possibly can. You poison the water. If they're drinking the water downstream, you sort of piss and shit in the water upstream. To create disease and havoc and mayhem downstream. Now, I read an article in Newsweek not so long ago about 120,000 troops that have refused to take the jab. They know that it's not really a jab and that the virus thing's an absolute scam, and why should they get this jab, which is really a mRNA gene therapy. And so the troops have been given a jab, and many of the troops are saying they don't want the jab, and they've been threatened with being delisted if they don't have the jab. So, if you can figure out why the United States powers that be, the deep state or whatever that you want to call them, would deliberately go about harming their own troops, not just harming them physically, but, harming the relationship that they got, okay, if you've got to go to war, you've got to put your life on the line, and you do it because you love your country. But, if your country's, deliberately trying to, harm you, well, that sort of creates a lot of ill will and backlash between the actual troops and the powers that be. Now, as I say, these are the anomalies that I can't figure out. Now, this is a land of the free. United States, land of the free. We're democracy and freedom and all the rest of it. But in 2020, we're told that 80 million people voted for Joe Biden. Now, that's if you're watching this in Australia, you're probably sort of used to the fact that election day everybody goes to vote. If you're on the roll, and so if you're over 18, you're on the roll, and you get fined if you don't vote. And apparently, this compulsory voting was put into our constitution on the advice of the United States. In 1901, when we federated and had a federal constitution and federal election, we took advice from the United States, and they said, look, the problem we've got is that we've got to get the vote out, and it costs, you've got to have dancing girls and barbecues and, all these incentives to get people off their backside and go out to vote. And so they said, look, why don't you put it in your constitution that people got to vote? You don't actually have to vote. You've got to go to the polling booth, and if you think, pox on all your houses, you just, write pox on all your houses on the ballot paper, which I've done quite a few times, or you just don't put anything on your ballot paper, you just get your name crossed off the electoral. They'll give you a how to vote card, or no, they give you a ballot paper, okay? Your how to vote cards are the people out the front. They sort of say, this is how you vote for the Liberal Party, Labor Party, Greens, or United Australia Party, whatever. So that'll tell you how to vote, but then you go and get your name crossed off. They'll tell you what, you tell them what your name is, and they'll find your name on electoral roll. They'll give you a ballot paper, and then you go over to the window thing there and you put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the ballot paper, then drop in the ballot box. Now if there's pox on all your houses, you don't want to vote for any of them, you've done your bit. You're not going to get fined because you've got your name crossed off the electoral roll, and so you just drop your empty ballot paper in the bin or the ballot box or whatever. Now so it's a long way I'm going around this to sort of address the situation in the United States where they have to get that vote out. It's not compulsory to vote. They've got to inspire people to get off their backside and get out there on election day, line up and vote for a candidate of their choice. Now, that sort of meant that over the years, firstly that they spend bucket loads of money to try and entice people to get out. They normally try and find a candidate for what I'm talking about the White House here. A candidate that's got appeal. You got the Bill Clinton type people that love the microphone, and they sort of inspire people. Well, they did back in whenever it was that he was elected. The Jimmy Carter, the people that are, people like the guy. Not only do they sort of have to feel that he's competent, that he's got the right policies, that he'd make a good president, but anyway, there was a record number of 80 million people vote for Joe Biden. Like the guy can hardly string 10 words together. Like he's 78 years old, and obviously got significant early onset dementia. So it was rigged. Okay, sometimes I think why Joe Biden, and a lot of people have sort of said, well, he was running against Trump, and Trump had the second term in the bag, so the Democrats sort of looked around and thought, well, I'm a pretty cool sort of guy, and I come from whatever, and I've got a lot of support there, and I can envisage somewhere down the track that I'm going to run for president, but not in 2020 because Trump's going to rocket in, like he'll get a second term. So the credible candidates, didn't put their hand up in 2020, and so, I will run Biden. And really, if you're going to rig the election, it doesn't matter a damn whether you've got a good candidate or a bad candidate, or somebody that is absolutely bloody hopeless, and there's a laughing stock of the world. But if you rig the election, it doesn't really matter. And you got somebody there that will basically do whatever he's told by the powers that be. Now, United States, in 2003, there was 1 in 150 children with, I won't say, born with autism. Okay, so they grow up. They were born in 2003, 1 in 50 now. That's gone up to 1 in 30, and they anticipate by 2050 it could be 1 in 2. Well, that's the end of the United States. I'm not going to sort of speculate on why this increase in autism. A lot of people suggest it's because the day they come out the womb they get jabbed, and that might have something to do with it. But anyway, it's 1 in 30, and like with the anticipated increase, like the country's got no future. It's it's economic basket case, and like the people are wonderful people. I've travelled in the United States, and I just I feel sorry. I feel really sorry for what has happened to the country, and I just hope and pray that some way to turn it around. Okay, now I was going to talk about Julian Assange. Like we've got probably the greatest Aussie that's ever lived is a guy called Julian Assange. He's a smart ass. He's a nice looking guy. He's compassionate. His heart's in the right place, and he's courageous. Now he's been 8 years in detention. He's currently in a prison in United Kingdom, and United States is seeking his extradition. And if they do extradite Assange to United States, well, his life is over. Like they think they're going to charge. He's likely to be convicted of espionage or whatever, and the penalties are something like 176 years in prison. So he'll never be released if he's extradited to the United States. Okay, now I'm going to talk about this COVID. No, hang on. I've talked about it. I'm going to talk about global warming or climate change. Okay. That we're burning all this fossil fuel, creating CO2, which goes up in the atmosphere, that is changing the climate. Now, I went to a meeting a few weeks ago. There's a South Australian guy called Ian Plimer, and a professor in Plimer. He's a really, really smart guy. And he was saying that the CO2 that's out there, like the trees, the oceans, everything that create the CO2 that goes up in the atmosphere, mostly it's good. Like we had a guy the other day at one of our Astro meetings that said that there's a parallel between increase in CO2 and the warming of the planet, and basically it's the warming of the planet that happens before the CO2. Like it's not the CO2 that warms the planet. You look at the graph and you see, the climate, the temperature's gone up and the CO2's gone up, and then the CO2 they go down and they go up and down together. And it was just assumed that putting all this CO2 out in the atmosphere pushes the temperature up. But the guy was saying, well, they go up together, and as a matter of fact, it's actually the temperature that goes up. Then you got more trees, and the ocean sort of bubbling away a little bit more, and then the CO2 goes up. So, it's not to do with burning of fossil fuels creating a CO2 that increases Earth's temperature. And Ian Plimer, I got off the track a little bit there, but Ian Plimer was saying, but 97% of the CO2 that's in the atmosphere is natural, and the burning of the fossil fuels it creates CO2, but that's only 3% of the CO2 that's out there. So if the burning of the fossil fuels is bad, and this is what creates all this havoc to the world's climate and things like that, well, you can't sort of say that 3% is bad, but the 97% is okay. So what's the rationale of sort of putting all this stuff out about CO2 burning fossil fuel, apart from the fact that they the people that trade on the derivative markets like to have everything making money for them, and carbon trading carbon credits and things like that, and making billions of dollars by running another scam. Okay. Now Yeah. Basically, what I'm saying is that this is a nonsense. We're told that there's going to be a new world order, that you'll own nothing and be happy. Well, it's rubbish, and really, I just implore the people of the United States, can you please get rid of these bozos that are running the country? You got a democracy. Just put the. I love United States. I love my heritage. I love my British heritage. I think I'm a fourth or fifth generation South Australian. I can trace the South Australian company. We were colonised by the British. They didn't call it a penal colony. They called it. Well, we're a free state. I don't have to sort of worry about people digging up my ancestry and saying, "Well, yeah, your great grandfather or grandmother came out in a convict ship, below deck," which was a source of great embarrassment to many earlier generations of Aussies, that they didn't want to be have the stigma of being a descendant of convict. But these days, people take pride in the fact that they might have a convict ancestor out there, back there. But anyway, I live in one of the most beautiful cities in the world, Adelaide, Australia, and we enjoy probably one of the best standards of living in the world, and that's thanks to very hard-working ancestors that came to Australia, that had the foresight to colonise this part of the world. A decision and an enterprise to which I'm very proud. Now, we've been told that the bozos that we currently have in government in our country, I don't know if you can see that, but prepare for war. We've been told that we've got to go to war with China. Now, you really have to pinch yourself and think, am I just having a bad dream here? Do these idiots really, think it's a good idea for us to go to war with China? I know probably the United States does. They want to have a proxy war, same as they got in Ukraine at the moment. They don't want to have a hot war with Russia. So what they're doing is they're funding, make a lot of money supplying equipment and things like that for Ukrainians to get themselves killed, having a war, a proxy war with Russia. And apparently that's what they have in mind for Australia. They'll make billions, trillions of dollars, arming us, and then it'll be us poor dumb Aussies that get our bloody ass kicked by China. As I said before, early in this presentation, that we're 26 million population compared to over 1 billion people in China. So that means that we're outnumbered 50 to 1. And then they got nukes. So, half a dozen nukes to take out our capital cities, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, Hobart. That's 90% of the population gone with a half a dozen nukes. And I just don't believe, that our government could be on board with such a absolutely mind-boggling stupidity. Have they got any brains? Is it, wall-to-wall idiots in Canberra that they would, I shouldn't say that because there are a few, dissenting voices, but the majority of them just seem to, have no common sense whatever, that they would suggest that this country go to war with China. It just does not make any sense. But anyway, that's I got notes here. So what are the two reasons for go to war? One, that it's justified. Okay, now a war with China is not justified. The second reason you go to war is that you think you can win.